Hello and welcome back. Thank you so much for continuing on this journey. My name is Raquel and I am a small batch cacao blend maker. I am also a professional job hopper or career portfolioist, and overall a lifelong learner, someone who pivots, adapts, strategizes, and teaches others how to do the same. So this series is specific to my cacao blend part of my business, part of my world. So here we explore the maker, me, who I am, the critique, the questions, concerns I have about my business, about business in general. I talk about the plant medicine, different ways to embody cacao in your day-to-day life, and all sorts of fun things like mindfulness, wellness, but not just mentally, emotionally, but potentially also physically, spiritually, financially. So this episode, we're going to get a little bit deeper in culture, in what it means to have culture. This is very close to my heart because in the previous episode we talked about cacao's journey. Literally, cacawalt, cacawa, they're all the same thing. It's different words for the same thing. And how it has gone on a physical journey, in etymological, linguistic journey, in anthropologic, sociologic, like all these different journeys, because this plant has been, as we know, or that we know of, it has been with us for almost 8,000 years. And our relationship to it has changed because of different cultures and different authorities of culture. So today I wanted to explore specifically culture for us humans, not necessarily our plant friends, and specifically me, so that you all can get to know me and we can go on this other journey, this other path of self-awareness, understanding, curiosity together. So I want to start with the word itself, culture, in English. I don't know, in all the languages, but I know that those of us who speak one of, or all, that's great, all the Romantic languages, Italian, Spanish, French, Portuguese, Romanian, I believe is in there. I think I included French, I don't remember. We all have a root commonality to our languages. And so in Spanish, it's cultura. So there's hardly any difference to the word culture in English in terms of how it's spelled. Perhaps the meaning changes a bit, and I'm not a linguist, so it's interesting to see similarities across different language families. But the word culture, so going back to English, it comes from the Latin colore, C-O-L-E-R-E, which means to tend to cultivate, and ultimately to care for the earth. So we can think about it. I'm not a biologist. I'm not someone who knows very much about agriculture. I'm having a cacao small batch blend business, but cacao is the extent of my knowledge, I would say. And I do have pothos and different kind of viney plants at home, but I'm not, again, just disclaiming, this is based off of research I've done. So when we think about, or when I think about culture, even nutritionally, some of the latest research, or what we now understand, is that We have different microbiomes. We have different kind of little ecosystems within our bodies. In the mouth, we have an oral microbiome. In the gut, we have another microbiome. And these, as I'm referring to them, ecosystems have their own culture. They have their own bacterias and their own things that need to be tended to. And so a lot of the nutrition world will say, you need to have probiotics, prebiotics, postbiotics. You need to have some good bacteria that you can find in yogurt and fermented foods, because that gives the good bacteria things to eat. And so it tends that culture. And you can even, I think I've seen, if you drink or you have tried apple cider vinegar for your salads, or if you've had a shot with it, people have taken shots, or dilute it in water, things like that, and drink it in their water. I think that even says something about culture on it, like, I don't know, something amount of culture. And so it's just interesting to think that the same word can mean different things, changes its meaning, its intention, its the understanding of it, as we change kind of how it's applied, where it's applied to. And so I like to start with the etymology of things as much as I can, the roots of things, because I think it's important to understand what was the basis, or what is the kind of the core, the essence of that word, of that theme, topic, idea. And so to tend, to cultivate, and understanding that the earliest use of this word, culture, was literally agricultural. So culture was what you did to the soil. You tended the soil, you prepared the soil, you gave it conditions to grow. And then, part of my notes here, Cicero, the Roman orator, took the word and used it metaphorically. He wrote cultura animi, 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 the cultivation of the soul. So again, we're changing where the word is being applied. And now he's using it as a tending of the inner life. So a cultivation, a discovery, a development from the inside out. Before it was just the outside, literally the outside, the environment, the soil. But now we're looking at the inner soil. Then in the 17th and 18th century, Europe, we're just gonna largely say Europe, I don't know specifically what countries, but then being cultured, so describing a type of person, became a social class marker. So it was a way of saying that you were refined, educated, elevated, above the common. So the word, again, being changed or defined differently, how it's being applied to who, what, where it's being applied to. And now it's meaning not just what you're tending to, but to who you're tending to. And that the who is in some way, shape, or form better, superior, elevated. Which is really interesting because it came from this very grounded, in the soil meaning. And now we're not even in the soil. We're like above the soil in terms of how this word is developing. So if you were cultured in the 17th and 18th century, you were taken seriously. So it stands to reason that during the time of the slave trade, the Industrial Revolution, I'm not saying they all happened at the same time, but I don't know when necessarily historians mark the beginning of industrial revolution, because potentially we can think about industriousness as also a mental thing. People who worked a lot with their minds, reinventing thoughts about the monarchy and starting to understand and develop social classes. So that for me is industrious. But anyways, I digress. This idea and this kind of historical note that during this time of so much change, literal change, worlds coming together, one world taking over, taking advantage of, extracting, exploiting other parts of the world. And those who did so were more cultured because they were above it. They probably thought that they had a right to because of their religious beliefs and because of the culture that they grew up in, that allowed, that tended that in them internally. So if you were not, if you were indigenous, if you were black, brown, colored, if you were outside of the European ideal, Christian in their eyes, the type of Christian that they wanted, the dress, the mannerisms, all the things, then you were not civilized. You were without culture, particularly their culture. So it's interesting because to make a colony, we're going to have another little word exploration here. Because to colonize or to have a colony comes from the same root. So if we think about a tree, these two words are coming from the same tree, which the Latin root was colore, we know that, to cultivate, to settle. When the Romans used that word colonia, colonia, to mean a settled land. And then centuries later, we're back at Europe, and the European empires used the word colonization to mean the same thing, meaning to cultivate you, individuals, cultivate you in a way that meant continued and sustained high culture, high society, high class for them. So it's just interesting. Well, I don't know if it's interesting because who created these words? Who created these cultures? That all these ideas and all of these systems and practices and ways of being are rooted in the same thing. So, what is culture? How do we think about culture? What does culture mean to us? And I think for me, a bigger part, especially now in our such a global, interconnected society, I'm recording this in 2026, and, it's how do we all come together beyond kind of the tribal, the statehood, the country, nationalism, because I think those play parts for sure in understanding ourselves and understanding parts of ourselves in relation to others who share those identities and cultures and thoughts and beliefs. But it only gets us so far because we're now living in a world that is divisive. I think there will always be a part because I don't know if the anthropologists or who said that there's always a part of humans, human species, that are tribal, that form groups, but are also equally independent. And so I think redefining even the word tribe, potentially, because we are so far, not all of us, I don't want to just speak for everybody, but from what I see, largely, we are all being affected by the same things, just in different portions and in different amounts. And so we are all one tribe as humans, but we don't see ourselves that way, and we don't culture that, we don't tend to that. So how do we live together? How do we all create a culture, an identity, a way of being that can sustain, protect, support all of us? So Is food, is language and music, stories, ceremonies, are those things that we can potentially taste, hear, feel, touch, are those the things with our five senses that we can call culture? Or is it more than that? It's something that you can't easily define, because going back to the root of the word, it's something that we're tending to. And whatever we may be tending to can change as life changes, as we change. So I truly believe that culture is a living thing. It can't be defined just in one way, black and white, two polarities, very divisive, which potentially challenges this notion of tradition and challenges a bit the notion of heritage, inheritance. But I think that all of that is part of, again, what are we tending to? What are we culturing? How are we cultured? In what ways? Because I believe, and it's been my experience, and we'll get into that in a little bit, that just because you grew up with a certain type of person, group of people who had a certain mindset or ate certain foods or believed certain things, those don't define you. And speaking as someone who was born in the United States, so I was born in North America, I was born on an American continent, so I keep going from the microcosm to the macrocosm, you see. And I was born in a specific state, in a specific city, and I didn't grow up there. I grew up in a different state that I was born in that had a different culture, that literally had a different environment, people, access to different things. And so I was born in Virginia and then grew up in southern Florida, to not keep it this mysterious thing. And so what I grew up in was a very Caribbean infused, a very Hispanic, Spanish, Latino environment, even though it wasn't where my family was born. All of my family are from Central America, specifically El Salvador. And so I didn't grow up with Salvadorian culture and other Salvadorian people. I did grow up with Hispanic, Latino people and culture. But even the individuals that I grew up with, some of them were from Cuba or from Puerto Rico themselves, but others were like me, born in the United States and of Dominican descent or of Colombian descent. And so excuse me, had to clear my throat. So just thinking about all these different layers that, my culture, what I was tending to, or what was being tended for me, to me, with me, was so layered, multifaceted. And so if we think about culture not just being this, I don't know if the right word is monolith, but this one echo chamber, that it is so much more than that, has so many layers. If you're a woman, if you're a man, if you're neither, if you're, I don't know, if you're not religious, if you don't eat those things, if you're vegetarian or vegan, or there's all these different layers, because we're all, again, individuals. And it gets challenging because we're trying to form an individual culture within the external, the greater culture, and those clash. And those can definitely crash into each other, and not, sometimes one defines the other. So if someone perhaps grew up in a very religious culture, upbringing, environment, I'm not a statistician, but the statistics, the probabilities of them becoming anti-religious or atheist or whatever, I don't know, 50-50 or 60-40 something. But what I'm saying is there perhaps might be some causation or some correlation. There's some connection with that. I know for me, so as I said, I'm first generation, which means that I'm the first in my family, my entire ancestry, to be born in the United States of North America. And unbeknownst to me, that put pressure, because that means that I'm the first, or what that has meant to me is that I am the first to have a potential, a level of access that has not been granted, afforded, that looked so different to the rest of my ancestors. And also what that meant is that I have not felt 100% one culture, meaning even if my whole family, which they are, but because my whole family is from El Salvador, I don't necessarily feel a huge tie, connection, kind of kinness, familyness, attachment to that culture. And as I said, I grew up with friends who were from the Caribbean. And so, my sense of culture and affinity to my family's culture was distant, felt more kind of at arm's length, legs length, whole body length apart from that. And, what that does, or how that has shaped me, is being someone who is not, who doesn't define myself with geography. Yes, I was born here in one of the American continents. I am double American because my family is also from Central America. But part of my ancestry is also Spanish. When I did the 23andMe, it came the results that I am 50% Indigenous American and West African. So that's a combined. It's like 40% Indigenous American and 10% West African. And then the other, there was like a 47% Spanish Iberian. So that shows from the colonization and the Spanish mixing with the indigenous. And then the last 3% was something like Egyptian, Middle Eastern. So, and the Spanish went through there. There was a whole, I don't know the whole history, but there's a culture, a blend there as well, attending to there. So I say all of that because I didn't grow up in a Spain. I grew up in a Spanish household speaking Spanish, but I didn't grow up in a European Spanish household. And I didn't grow up fully immersed in Salvadorian culture. And so a lot has been left to me to discern, decipher, figure out. And even in the language Spanish, I had so much shame that I wasn't speaking it correctly, that I wasn't cultured enough in that, because I couldn't get the slang, the idiosyncrasies that people who grow up and have that language deeply embedded in them, in South America, in Central America, in the Caribbean. I didn't grow up speaking that the entire time. I grew up speaking Spanish and English. And so I used to really question this part of my culture, Spanish. What about my other cousin who grew up here in the United States and she doesn't speak hardly any Spanish, but she understands it. She can, listen to it, read it, potentially write some of it, but she doesn't speak it. Does that make us less than whatever our culture thinks we are? And the more I started holding that question about what it means to be Latino, Hispanic, someone of both Spanish and indigenous descent, I thought to myself, but the Spanish, literally those from Spain, took the language, the native languages and dialects of the indigenous, to such an extent that they burned so many, if not all, most of the records and the way of culture for these people, for my people. And so why do I have this struggle, this affliction with the language itself, when the language has changed in and of itself, and the language was not even my people's. It wasn't even the indigenous thing. It wasn't their way. It wasn't their culture. It was forced onto them. And so I thought to myself, so why am I shaming myself and unsure of who I am when, as I can clearly see, going back to what we talked about with the root of the word culture and going back to how things change and transform depending on what it is applied to. Even the Spanish language itself has been applied in so many ways to the entire Latin American region, Central, South, and Caribbean. And it's not even our language. If we're going to start to be definitive and say what's mine, what's ours, it wasn't even something that was native to those lands. So I started to understand and research a bit about the difference between the word Latino and the word Hispanic, which comes from the word Hispania, which is the Roman name for the Iberian, the Spanish peninsula. So most of us, I think, would say we're Latino, we're not Hispanic, because not everybody who is Hispanic, not everyone who is Latino is Hispanic. But just understanding the nuances, and again, the way culture is being tended to or being forced upon. So, I want to kind of take a moment to talk about what it means to reclaim something, remember something, redefine. Because when I started on this journey of understanding culture and understanding it for myself, and then having to kind of pressure test it with my friends, my family, and actively have to say, not have to, right? But I think part of what I'm tending to, or what I have been in practice with, is being okay with being messy, especially in this conversation of culture, and showing that, being okay with not being okay, especially in front of my loved ones and colleagues, and even if that requires a longer explanation, but being able to tend to something internally inside me in a way that is meaningful and is helpful for my own groundedness and sovereignty. So, reclaiming feels messy. Reclaiming feels like walking on the sand on a beach, and it's dark. Maybe there's a moon out, or the moon is out, but the moonlight might not be shining fully. And so there's a little bit of light, but mostly having to feel my way through it, feel our way through it. Maybe we can feel the cold sand. Some parts are wet sand, and they get in between our toes. Other parts are dry sand, and our feet go right through. But it feels heavier because our weight goes down in that part of the sand. So as we walk, we feel kind of unbalanced because there's one side of our bodies, one foot that is in the wet sand that feels smoother, easier walking over the wet sand, and the other part that feels deeper, harder, because more of our weight is getting sunken into the dry sand, and we're walking, or we're trying our best to walk, and maybe we feel wind, we feel cold, we feel alone. Maybe we are walking with someone, but most of this journey is internal, is within us. And we're looking for the moonlight, we're looking at the stars, we're breathing. Maybe we feel a tiny bit, those tiny little crabs that crawl over our toes, and we get scared. And that's how reclamation, remembering, redefining, restoring feels to me. It's this constant practice of, how am I feeling in this moment? How am I feeling in this environment? What feels wet? What feels cold? What feels true? What feels clear? Kind of the what and the why, and the what and the why. And there's a constant tending to, cultivating in that. And I want to close with this because I think that a lot of people, maybe you who are listening, feel this as I do, that it is hard to know what to do most of the times. Should I take this job? Should I do this thing? Should I talk to that person? Should I keep cultivating XYZ relationship? But then, even deeper than that, questioning who we are and why we are who we are and how we are choosing to define or piece together the things that define us. Because that's ultimately a choice, as much as it can be a choice. Because I didn't choose my lineage, the blood running through my veins, but I can choose how much to embrace it, how much to explore it, how much to understand and engage, cultivate, tend, nourish it. And that's what I think reclamation is to understanding what I want to claim, what I want to bring back, what I want to honor and embody, and what I really, in this moment of my life, want to understand and make peace with. So wherever you are with your version of this, with your own mosaic, your own transmission, your in-between, I just want to say that what you're reaching for, what you are searching, embracing, questioning, all of that feeling and all of those, the actions, all of that is real. And I want to thank you for doing that work, for being in it, cultivating inside you, to caring for the soil within as well as without, so that something can grow, something more can grow. You can, unbeknownst to you, be part of the next layer, the next evolution, the next level of growth for your culture. And I mean that personally, as in your own culture for yourself, but also the larger culture. So Thank you for being you, for being here on this journey. I look forward to being in your ear next time. If you want to reach me, please leave a comment, shoot me an email. I'd love to know how you're doing, where you are on this journey. So until next time, take care.